All right, let's dive in. We are back up and running, as you remember, with our financial transparency working group, working with a working group of SEAs and LEAs who are scrambling to meet the federal ESSA requirement to report expenditures by school level. So today's meeting has sort of two twin focuses on it right now. The first is need data now, meaning that if we don't have a plan for getting data, that has to happen very, very soon. So we're going to walk you through that quickly. And the second part of that is how good is good enough. So, you know, not everybody's going to have a perfect data set that accurately reflects real spending down to the school level for every expenditure. But we are asking the question here, how good is good enough? And that may vary depending on the data that you have. So, Katie, do you want to kick us off with just the standard overview?
Sure. So just a general, you all know this by now, but if you want to be unmuted at any point, please use that little hand raise tool and we will unmute you. And if you would like to ask a question or even make a comment, you all have like a little question box, and anything that you type in there will show up for everybody on the call, and we can also answer those questions. And then we'll make time to read those questions out and read those comments out throughout the call. Okay, so like Marguerite said, we're going to focus on the need data now, kind of talk through what are some of the options based on where you are for collecting data as soon as possible, since you all are coming up against kind of a tight deadline. Then we're going to talk through some examples of research and then practice of some states that have done this data collection in the past few years, and talk through kind of what each method can yield and kind of the benefits and drawbacks of each method. We'll then look at an example from Colorado, and then we will go into a little bit towards the end of the meeting, something that we started talking about on our last call, which is developing a framework for data standards and thinking through some potential uniform standards that this group can help draft as we move through this financial transparency requirement.
Excellent, thank you. So that's it. And the Edgenomics team pulled out a meme this week to hopefully instill the urgency in all of you to get data and get data soon. So the data reporting the way it is right now, because the Department of Ed pulled the regs, well, I guess technically they had to because Congress did, but the regs had included a possible extension that outwent the extension, and what we are working under right now is that the data must be reported for the 2017-18 school year, which you know starts this summer. So there has to be a plan in place to collect data for this coming school year, and it must be reported by December 2018. And that means you got to have data. So show me the data. That's the first part of this, and we're going to dive in pretty quickly here. You'll remember that we had kind of 4 boxes. We said on the left, you might be an SEA where you have a chart of accounts, you have a field for location, and maybe you already have your hands on the data. Maybe all you have to do is request it. That's kind of the furthest along some of the states are. Box number 2, you might have been using the SLFS or survey, and that was a survey that was sent to districts. Districts could fill it out. You may have also had the chart of accounts in group 1, but then just keep yourself in group bucket 1. But if you didn't, then you might be able to rely on the SLFS survey data, or you could choose to implement the survey data. Another option was some states have some sort of file of real salaries and benefits with personnel by location. That's a really great starting place because, as you know, labor costs are about 80% all in of school district expenditures, and that's a lot of data, and you might be able to build an expenditure picture around those data. Or bucket 4, you might not have anything yet, in which case you might be thinking, can I get my hands on either some salary data, or should I be sending around an SLFS survey, or do I want to bite the bullet and try to build a chart of account system and get it in place by this summer, which is a big step, but maybe you have a pilot one going on. So you may find yourself, regardless of what bucket you're in, you may find yourself in one of three different places. You might already have data, and we've given you examples of it. Mississippi, Rhode Island, and others have a chart of accounts in place. The districts are using it, and the districts are, there's a mechanism in place already at the state to capture that data. And that means you may already have that data. And Wyoming, I think, too, and some of the others. So lucky you have data already. And what you're going to be doing now at this point is running some early analyses of the data and considering allocation rules for centrally assigned costs and so on. So we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But you might not be there yet, in which case you could be in that data you might have. Sorry for bucket one, for this group one here, if you already have data, you might already have real salary data. Maybe you don't have chart of accounts data, but you might already have salary data, and you know you're just going to build on that initially. You might already have some sort of files that you have. That means you already hold the kind of data that you're going to need, and you know you'll hold it for next year to be able to fill out these reports. Number two means maybe you don't have it yet, but you know that the districts have it. So maybe they've had a chart of accounts, and all you've done is said, I need you to send me that file with the location code. Some states, like California and some others, there's an optional location code, and they may or may not be using it, but now at the time it might be that I'm going to ask you to use it and send me your files. So you'll have to physically, or sort of, actually ask for electronic files. But what you expect to get is electronic files that you can sort of put together, either their salary and benefits files or chart of accounts files or something that you can use to build an expenditure file by school. Or you got nothing, and maybe what you want to do is issue a survey. And that might be the SLFS survey, might be a different survey, but you're basically going to say, I'm not going to build it out of electronic files. I am going to ask you to tell me what you spend by school, and that is what I will report. So there's sort of a survey kind of thing. And it could still be an electronic survey or something, but that's different than building it out of actual original files. So those are, I think, really kind of the three physical mechanisms for getting your hands on data. And I think I would like to stop just really quickly at the beginning of this to figure out how many of you are in each of these categories. Do you already have data? Do you plan to ask for electronic files? Do you plan to issue a survey, or you're not sure yet? And if you wouldn't mind taking a moment to answer that in the question box for your state. Some of you we already know, but you could just say, I'm Rhode Island, I'm number one, or whatever, or I, wherever I am, I'm not sure yet. That would help us get a sense of what you're thinking about in terms of getting your hands on data. Great, and we do have some examples coming in, so I appreciate that.
So I see Hawaii and Massachusetts are both at 1.
And I think there might be a hand raise. Tennessee, number 2. Great, and if you want to answer verbally, you can do that too. Just raise your hand and we'll make sure to unmute you. Or if you think there's, another mechanism besides ours here, that's possible too. Looks like Wyoming has the data, and Virginia, number 3. Going to be doing a survey. We have Delaware, number 1. Yes, that's true. You have the data. Ohio is number 1. This is great. North Carolina is planning on adding a location field to your chart of accounts. That's great. So you'll be either moving into number 2, or you already have data, but it'll just be richer and you'll be number 1. Illinois, most likely number 2, and yes, that's a possibility for Illinois, because I know that there are a lot of files available in Illinois that you could build that expenditure picture. And Oregon, excellent statement. Yes, you are in the first category. I love this. We do have the school level data, but what we're finding is that some districts are better than others at reporting at the school level. And that is probably going to be a pretty common storyline. So you'll have data, it should be great, and it might not be great. So that may mean that your numbers are going to be kind of rough for the first year or two. Or if you find that there are some districts where it doesn't look like there's very much reported at the school level at all, this is a great time to send them a message like, for this next school year, we love to see you using that location code a little bit better, because we're going to be showing how much you are spending at the school level, how much you're spending at the central office level, and this is your opportunity to kind of get that accounting game in place before the school year starts.
There's a comment on Colorado. They believe they've already done number 1. Is that correct, or that they're in 1?
I think so. Katie, am I correct that Colorado had been using SLFS but also has expenditure files? I'm just not sure if you have them for all the districts.
Yeah, Adam, I'm not sure. I know that you've shared with us some of your expenditure data files from some districts, and you definitely have SLFS, but I was under the impression that there was some concern about Colorado not being able to collect expenditure files directly from districts or that people expenditure number because of the policy things in place from the legislature that like the state agency wasn't able to collect that directly. So if you want to, I can unmute you if you want to weigh in there. Adam, you're unmuted if you want to jump in.
I don't know that anybody can hear me.
It's a little fuzzy.
Maybe typing. Yeah, we can hear you, Adam.
Okay.
Or maybe we can't hear you. Oh, well.
Okay. It sounds like he's typing. Okay. Yeah, we can hear you. Adam, we can hear you. You're unmuted.
Right now, and hopefully you can hear me, the Colorado Department of Education is not authorized to collect school level or individual school level expenditure data via our data collection system. We do have legislation that has evolved over the last 2 years. We have a financial transparency website, which I believe Yolanda and Jennifer have talked at length with you about. It's a financial transparency website that goes live on July 1 of 2017. Some medium and large size school districts are required in legislation to report expenditures tied to the individual schools within their districts. Districts defined as small rural school districts, and that is more than half of the school districts in Colorado are not required in legislation to tie expenditures to the unique schools in their school districts. So that's where we're at. We do have a financial transparency and ESSA working group subcommittee that we have formed to discuss ESSA requirements and the best way to provide you all with the data that you're after. So hopefully you can hear me.
Yeah, you're right. I forgot about that. That's right. We talked about that. Interesting law in Colorado that says that the SEA cannot ask the district for it, but you're going to go through this third party who's going to report it. And so, yeah, I think Colorado is a kind of an asterisk for at least a while. But maybe what's going to be of, making sure that the vendor, I think that you're working with, has the ESSA law in mind as they work on that transparency bit. But you're right. That's right. Colorado is an asterisk. We have also a couple questions on SLFS. I know Ross asked and Amy asked about it. The school level finance survey is a survey that was a pilot federal collection that was done by Stephen Kornman. And we can post on our website an example of the survey. it's the reason why we reference it is that the survey has been used on a pilot basis by a bunch of states, at least for some of their districts. And because it lines up with kind of the F33 data collection, it's worded in a format that many districts can answer most of their questions. So it'll be familiar to people. And nicely, it will give some comparison data across states that's already sort of grouped and categorized in the same way. So we can post that survey instrument online. We have a copy of it. It's not perfect for the federal law because it asks you to break out expenditures with exclusions and expenditures without exclusions, and the difference between the two is partly federal money and partly not. So it's not a perfect survey for this, but it's a very good interim step if you need to use a survey, because this survey has been piloted, it's been tried, and other states are also using it. And it will line up with categories that districts know. So, and mostly districts have been able to complete the survey. So we will post that SLFS survey instrument on our Fitwig site, and make sure that the two of you that asked get it sent to you.
And Kim, to address your question, Kim says, and it doesn't include all expenditures required to be in ESSA. And I think actually my answer to that would be there is no requirement of all expenditures other than reporting by source of funds, and the survey doesn't currently separate source of funds, so that is a drawback. But in terms of what you have to include, that is no longer defined by regulation.
Although I think we would I think you're right. There's no grand total. Like you could fill out these buckets and not ever say like what the full expenditure was for the district. So if you're going to use this SLFS survey, we would suggest that you use the F33 data or some other full expenditure number, and whatever was not, like, take the difference and add it in somehow. So we will do a kind of a sub session for those of you who want to use the SLFS survey instrument to show you how to do that, because you're absolutely right, Kim. You know, the instrument might just report a third or a half of all spending in the district. There's nothing that says you have to square it up with the full cost. So even though you might meet the requirement, the data are going to be pretty useless. And if your goal is to build something of value, it might not be of value at all if we don't do a little bit of work on the SEA end to add in the rest of the money. So we will do a sub session for those SEAs wanting to use the SLFS data set and walk you through how to do that. Any other questions or comments? Yep, you're right, Kim. It doesn't include transportation or food service, and survey. It says things like how much money was spent here, and there's no verification that you got it all, right? Like you just could have left off chunks of money. So that's very much the short end of the SLFS survey. But you could basically say whatever was not captured in SLFS, we added back in at the bottom as an LEA expenditure so that you could still have a grand total. So that's what we'll do. All right, so this is helpful. Thank you all for weighing in on where you are. And hopefully you have a sense now, at least of some sort of plan in place. So we wanted to switch over and start talking about how good is good enough. And this is really just to get you all going on thinking about this. But we know that some places, we mentioned Rhode Island, we see a lot of other ones on here, they have a covenant chart of accounts. They may already have rules about what is or is not coded to schools, and how those funds get collected at the state level. So that's all in place. There are other places that have done examples, including in Maryland, where a vendor called AIR did a study. They collected the electronic data from the districts. They used expenditure survey personnel files, and then they calculated sort of centrally what the expenditures were by school. And so that's an example of how that was done. And that study is coming out soon. So we're going to hopefully use it as an example with you all soon. And in the survey, like we mentioned, SLFS might be a way to do that. You send that out. It gives you some school level data on a subset of expenditure categories. You probably need to balance that out with something else that gets at the rest of the money. So one question for you all is, that you'll all ask is, how much money was actually tracked to the school level? And in places like Rhode Island or other ones that have used a common chart of accounts, you might see, anywhere from about 65% of the money all the way to maybe near all of it that is somehow tracked or allocated or apportioned or attributed to the school level. So that can give you often the highest amount. If you're going to collect some electronic files from districts, including salary files, and kind of do your own math on it, you're going to see numbers that are maybe more around 54%, maybe higher. We ran some numbers on Milwaukee, and we don't have the full picture there, but we got as high as 80%. So you can get much higher without depending on what kind of files that you have. If you're going to do the survey, it's going to be a smaller amount, probably something in the neighborhood based on the SLFS study of 37 to 54%. So, part of how good is good enough is what you're aiming toward, and maybe where your starting place is. Another consideration is going to be, what's the burden? So if you already have electronic data, there's going to be minimal burden to the LEAs. The SAAs can do all the analysis, and that's going to be done in your office, and you'll have a sense of what that burden is. If you've got to collect data files from districts, the LEAs are going to have to kind of cooperate, right? They're going to have to extract and send files. And then the SEA is going to have a lot of time and resources that might be cleaning, merging, and analyzing these data sets. And you'll have a sense of how many LEAs you have and how cooperative they'll be in getting those data. And in the survey, the same thing. The LEAs are going to have to do some work. They're going to have to complete the survey, whether it's electronic or paper, but there is a survey. And that means they're going to have to do some analysis on their end to actually get the right numbers in the right boxes. And then the SEAs are going to have to review, verify, kind of pull it together, potentially add in this extra amount of money. So you can see that there is going to be more burden as you move to the right. Some of you may not have the capacity yet to get that electronic data, but you can see over time how that might reduce the burden and how that may be a consideration. The other couple considerations, uniformity. And I know a lot of you are asking, and including Oregon, we're doing this, but we may or may not have uniformity yet on how the districts are completing their accounting. So if you already have electronic data, it depends on whether there are common practices is in place around attribution or using the location code. And so that, you just have to look at your data and say, how often do I see these kinds of expenditures coded to schools? And there may or may not be uniformity. You can run the tests on it and sort of see. If you're going to collect the actual data files, the SEA is going to control what it assigns to schools and so on. So you may say, well, if I have personnel files and I'm just going to allocate instructional staff, or maybe instructional staff, principals, and other support staff, and everything else is going to be either assigned by formula or left at the LEA level. You may have uniformity. It may not be the richest data, but you may choose to do it all your way. And if you do a survey, it really kind of depends, because you introduce some error in a way by having each district run their own calculations. They're human beings that are doing that. And if there's a common chart of accounts in place, that survey may be still pretty high, but if there isn't, you should expect a lot of variation in how the districts are going to answer that survey. And chance for error. If you have electronic data, there may be less error. People sort of may have habits in place for how they're apportioning funds, although it can still exist, and you could often find it. We see that. We see it in big, rich electronic data sets. It's things like, we know there's no humanly possible way that this Social Security expense for $2.8 million was assigned to this preschool. It was, but it just doesn't make any sense. So there can be error there, but you could probably kind of sift through it and take a look. If you're collecting data files, you know, also some error can exist. You know, all you get is what you get. Again, you can check it at the SEA level. The survey is going to have more error. And a couple of years ago, the federal government has been, you know, doing civil rights data collection. And you can just tell from looking through the data that there are a lot of errors in there. Some districts might have been told, you know, report the real salaries of the teachers at the school, and yet the number is the exact same number for every school in the district. So they didn't fill out the survey right. So that can happen. So lastly, another consideration, you could look at, depending on which group you're using, you're going to want to run consistency checks to look at the uniformity and attribution. You may, if you're looking at data files, that could be a good short-term strategy, even though it's sort of a pain for the SEA to do all these calculations. It could give you the foundational knowledge you need to start to standardize. If you're doing the survey, one of the tricky parts will be how to add back in the rest of the money, but also how to break out federal. The SLFS survey gives you a way to start, but not a great way to do that. So the survey instrument is, I think, going to be improved for this next year. So it's going to actually ask to break out federal. But right now, you're going to have to kind of subtract backwards to make that happen. And then who knows how good the numbers are going to be. So those are some other considerations. We left this note at the bottom. You know, it's still always worth triangulating with additional data sources, including your total expenditure data for each district, to make sure that what's being reported at the school level has some way to add up, so you have a sense of how much is captured there, and perhaps adding back in whatever's left that's not reported at the school levels. The other way to check is the personnel files. Some districts may read the instructions but still report average salaries. So if you have personnel files, we would suggest take a look, find kind of your highest salaried schools and your lowest salaried schools, and see if the numbers sort of add up. And so those are kind of our quick and dirty considerations. And I'll stop for a second if any of you have any questions on this, and then we're going to jump into how good is good enough when we're talking about attribution. All right, let's jump on. Some of you may be doing attribution or allocation by formula. So for instance, you may say, I have a pension bill and I can put it all at the central office, or I can assign it out to staff, and I might assign it out to staff based on staff counts, or I could assign it out to staff based on staff salary. So it's a lot of work to actually put the pension costs out by a teacher, and you might have the data to do that, but you might not. Similar, you know, health benefits, the same kind of thing. Maybe your data set has that in there and you could do it. Maybe you're looking at a single health benefits bill and you want to just know what to do with this. It doesn't feel right to leave it at the central office, but you don't have a quick and easy way to assign it out to all the different staff at each school. So the AIR did a study for the Department of Ed where they looked through with a lot of states and districts their actual spending, and then they compared it to what would happen if you just did it by formula. And you can see right here, this graph that we put together from their data shows the average error. So the blue is the error. And so if you allocated health benefits by staff FTE counts, you get whatever that is, 12, 14% error, and a little bit less error if you allocate health benefits by salary. And same with the retirement benefits. So what you can see is that in both of these cases, if you were to allocate your health benefits and your retirement benefits by salary, you'd be a little bit closer. That's a better way of allocating them. So the one thing, and Katie, maybe you remember some of these numbers, is that there's actually a lot of variation by location. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, so you can see the source down at the bottom, and it's also, I think, on a link at the end of this. So once we share the slides, you can go through and read it yourself, but there's a ton of data broken out by source. So this is a 9-site study. I believe it was 5 states and 4 districts. 2 of our states on the call actually participated, Hawaii and Rhode Island. And there's just huge variation in terms of state and district, kind of what the percentages are. So I think it ranged anywhere from like 4 to 18% for health benefits, similar for retirement. And I think Marguerite's going to show you the instructional costs or per pupil support costs and instructional support costs. And again, these are all averages, but the range is also big, from 20 to sometimes like 100%, depending on the district and the site.
Yeah, and these two, so if let's say you had a pupil support number and you said, okay, I think I'll just attribute that out to schools based on staff FTE counts or based on enrollment, you would see there's still a lot of error either way. Similar with instructional support. You might say, I'm just going to allocate it based on staff FTE and enrollment, and even more error. I mean, these are really not great proxies. You're almost better off leaving that money in the central office, acknowledging that you haven't you don't have a good mechanism for allocating it out yet. So for both of those, they were not well attributed, at least by those formulas. There might be other formulas you could use, but, and in fact, sometimes with instructional support or pupil support, if you can break it out by student type, you know, is it geared toward bilingual education? Can you allocate it out by bilingual ed pupil counts? You might get numbers that are a little bit, have less error in them.
So we have a couple of comments here. Health benefits is counterintuitive. Is it possible that the test on FTE was on all and maybe not on benefit eligible FTEs?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a little bit counterintuitive to me too, but it may be the case that the benefits levels maybe were different by staff types. You know, I don't know if instructional staff have different benefits than, you know, bus drivers or something like that. It does seem like in some ways that seems like it should be a flat cost, unless under health benefits they maybe put some other kind of benefit in there. But I'm not sure. I don't know. I thought it was counterintuitive to me too, but the numbers weren't very different. Yeah, we don't know. Those were there. We'll check back, make sure we didn't do an error, or maybe ask AIR in case they flipped those two. Let's see. Any other questions or comments on those? Yeah, okay, so then let's take a look at the next one here. So how good is good enough? So when you're thinking about, should I use a formula to just apportion out money? And you know, I think I've gone back and forth on using the word attribute, allocate, and apportion. So we'll come up with some common definition of those, because we were using some definitions that are not the same as the ones that were used by the AIR study. So we've got to just bear with me now as we think about those different words. But if you're thinking about, you know, sending out costs by formula, these are a few that we've had a conversation with ERS, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a second. But how much money is involved, you know, whether or not you want to use a formula or try to figure out where it really goes. How relevant is it for schooling and learning? How much error is there done if you're doing it by formula? How lumpy is it? Like, is most of it at one school, and so now we're going to end up sending it around to all the other schools? How frequent are the costs incurred? You know, does a school sort of buy textbooks once every 10 years, and so allocating it out in a particular year may or may not make a whole lot of sense. So we've been talking a little bit to ERS about this, and ERS, I know Jonathan's on the line, is working on a tool for LEAs where they could upload their data and explore the attribution of central costs. Let us know in the chat box if you want to be part of a webinar or demonstration on that, or kind of a branch out group. It's really more of an opportunity for individual districts to sort of look at how we assign costs and what the different options are, and when it makes sense to kind of look more deeply and decide to move some money from central office out to schools. But I imagine that this might be particularly interesting for some of the LEAs on the call. Oh, good. So we got a few of you that are interested. We'll advertise it all for all of you, but just wanted to let you know that's kind of another angle on this issue. Sort of look at the money and start to make decisions about what you want to, where you want to assign it, and if you want to use formula, and if you don't, based on maybe a set of criteria that would allow you walk through all those. Excellent. All right, and we're collecting your responses. I see it looks like a bunch of you are interested, and so we'll move forward with that. I know ERS has been hard at work at that. Jonathan, do you want to add anything? I want to make sure you're unmuted here. Hold on one second, so that if you have any other comments on this, because I know your head's been deep in this space. You should be unmuted.
Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, no, that covers it. We're thinking that this helps folks unpack the magnitude and nature of costs that are school reported, that are essentially reported as though play out at schools, and those costs that are truly sort of central. And then once we are able to unpack that, then you can play with and explore options for allocating, for deciding what you want to do with that middle group of costs that are play out in schools but are essentially centrally reported. And do you want to actually push them to be reported at school level? Do you want to use different per pupil allocation for special ed pupil per school, some different allocations to see how that sort of plays out in terms of an overall answer and overall dollar per pupil by school?
Great. Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of interest in this. So this is useful. Good. And I think and there'd probably be ways to get really smarter on this quickly by running through a couple examples or something, and then say, okay, now we know where we want to go.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Great.
All right, and then we are moving along. We just in terms of showing kind of how different types of files yield different numbers. This is a Colorado, the folks in Colorado will remember this data because I think you pulled it out. And then we went back with the SLFS data and lined it up. So Colorado is a place where in some of the districts there are already expenditure files. We talked about, you know, the SEA can't request them, but there's also this SLFS thing going on. And the expenditure files, as you can see, remember in our bare minimum template that we had, where you show your school, you show the amount of federal and state and local at the school level, then you show that school's share of the LEA level, and then you get a grand total. And so when the expenditure file was used, 78% of the money was actually captured at the school level, which is a good number for this particular district. And we lined it up with what was reported in the SLFS. Now, granted, when you use the SLFS survey on a district that already has this rich expenditure data, it should be pretty rich at the SLFS level. So, and it was. It didn't have the breakout, at least that we could sort of pull out preliminarily by federal and state and local, but we still found that when the expenditure file was used to go answer the questions on the SLFS, you got 76% of the data captured at the school level. Actually only 65 if you went down to the with exclusions part, but that's comparing it to the F33 number, which is the grand sort of total expenditure level at that district. So Katie, do you want to say something about how the exclusions work?
Sure. Yeah. So you will all see, I will upload the actual SLFS tool for data collection, but there's kind of for each category of reporting, there is a field for with exclusions and without exclusions. And the exclusions include, as you can see on the bottom of the slide here, expenditures from federal revenue sources other than funds intended to replace local tax revenues, pre-K expenditures, and special education expenditures. So as Marguerite mentioned, there is some level of breakout in terms of federal and state and local dollars that you can kind of capture in this SLFS, but it is imperfect because the exclusions are grouped. And so when folks are reporting on the SLFS and they take out the federal revenue, they're also at the same time taking out pre-K and taking out special ed, which may or may not be your state's strategy when it comes to reporting the dollars for this financial transparency requirement.
Right. So anyway, it has some limitations, but at the same time, you know, if districts have expenditure files at the district in whatever form they do, SLFS is decent at capturing a good amount of that money can be decent at capturing a good amount of money at that school level. All right. So our last agenda item is to start talking about drafting a set of reporting standards, reporting standards for this financial data. So the goal, as you may remember from the end of the last conversation, this all came from you guys, which was we'd love to have spending comparisons that allowed us to compare spending at one school in one state to another school in another state. And really, honestly, there's enormous power in being able to do that. So if you are, let's say, a rural school in Nevada, and you want to look across rural schools all across the country, maybe that have, you know, a population of, let's say, 500 elementary students, that half of them are bilingual or 75% of them are bilingual, you know, you're getting into a more and more narrow set of schools. And you might also want to know what's possible if I was out of my context. So, you know, I'm in Nevada and the state's always done it this way, but I wonder, are places able to spend their money differently and get even better results outside of my state, and start to look at that and benchmark yourself against peers all over the country. There is a really big power in that opportunity, in part because we can learn from what they're spending. We might learn about what's possible with students at different types, and what innovations, if they're using any, they could start to spread. So that goal of having these comparisons, you know, makes really good sense, and that's what we heard from you all. Now, as you might remember, when the regulations went away, a lot of the guidelines around sort of uniformity and things like that across states, which actually were never really in there, but they disappeared completely. And it's now the option for states to choose, if you wanted to have some common reporting standards, to do so. And so what we started thinking about, we spent a little bit of time since our last meeting, like how do you go about drafting those in a way that sort of acknowledges that states are in many different places, and that the data are much richer in some places than others. But at the same time, we kind of want to have a direction that we're going to, because we assume states will be building stronger data over time. And these are, of course, going to be completely optional because there won't be anything in the federal law that requires these. So we started imagining maybe the right way to sort of block this out is in tiers, maybe with 3 tiers. Tier 1 being, what is like the minimum, if you're going to do a survey or whatever else, what do you want to report so that there is some level of comparability across states? And that might mean we just want to say, let's define student enrollment in a particular way. And that's, some states have weighted students. So like a low-income student might be considered 1.5, but if we're going to count students differently in different states, that's going to be really hard to interpret the data. So maybe the answer is that we're just going to, for the sake of making these calculations, We're going to define students. Each student who's full-time in school is considered 1.0, and you can weight your spending however you want, but we got to, use that count for students. And we might, there's a very big difference between average daily attendance and average daily membership or a single time count. And maybe it's just that your state is going to specify that and make that clear on the reporting. Maybe not, but there's going to be some sort of minimum there. Probably want to clarify what expenditures are included or excluded. So are we only reporting the school level, or do we want to capture all the money that the district spends? And or do we want to specify what's excluded if that's the minimum? So the minimum would be some very minimum tier 1 data reporting standards. You'd move to tier 2 and to tier 3, as your state got access to richer data. So tier 2 might say we're going to start breaking out things. Again, it's optional, but it helps if we're going to make comparisons, if we can break out special ed or transportation or food services. Maybe not everybody can break them out right away, but as you do develop richer data, if you could break those out, those are things that can help us make comparisons across schools. Tier 3 might be kind of the richest, like where we start to say we want additional breakouts. Maybe it's useful to break out by objects to look at benefits or different functions. Maybe do we want to clarify options for attributions? If you're going to attribute, you can either use real benefits, or you have to do it based on salary or FTEs or something like that. Do we want to put kind of some rules in place for how costs can be apportioned out? And then do we want to make sure we've, maybe this is in tier 2 or maybe it's in tier 3, that we've aligned the spending data with comparable student outcomes data, maybe by percentiles, by groups of students. And if this is the sort of base framework, as a group, do we start adding things into each of these 3 tiers so that you end up with some reporting standards that if you're in tier 2 or tier 3, and which other states are in tier 2, tier 3, what you can compare and what you can't. So this is our first stab at this, and we put it out here just because we're starting to think about it and figure it out, and know that we'll be talking to lots of you and wondering if you have any reactions, either early on or you can always respond later to as you think about it, of whether or not this kind of a framework makes sense. Any thoughts at all are okay? And maybe as you're thinking about it, let me show you some data from Milwaukee. I think Shannon's on. We got this from you. In Milwaukee, the money's broken out into different kinds of categories than probably a district in, let's say, Mississippi or Oregon. And you can see that there's a per pupil calculation in the files that you've already produced that shows how much that you can get from your school level kind of board formula allocation. There's a breakout for school counselors, art, music, gym, special ed, the school office, grants. I think that includes some of the federal, maybe supplemental support, transportation, and so on. And you can have these kind of breakouts by sublines, but the sublines may be different in different places, which might be like the sense of why we want, in reporting standards, we want to start with the very bare minimum, because some of you won't be able to break out by art, music, and gym. Some of you will, and then and maybe put some of these categories in the kind of tier 3. And Shannon, do you want to give us a little bit of color on this at all? We'll make sure you're unmuted here.
Sure. So one of the things that we, outside of the new federal requirement, have really been looking at across our schools is around equity. And how do we treat schools where really we're at 80% poverty differently when we see the needs of poor kids looking different at different schools. And so really have begun to dig deep to try and differentiate what's happening and what choices are being made at different schools, and are generally finding the process exceptionally enlightening, frightening, and identifying where we have some work to do.
Well, and that's kind of the upside of all this, right? Like once this stuff is out, you know, locally, does it spur conversations on about, is this intentionally, are we getting the best outcome out of the money that we're spending this way? Are there other ideas that we might consider if we choose this one again? You know, do we tweak it a little bit to make sure we're getting the full value out of the, you know, whatever, maybe $800 we're spending on special ed bus transportation or whatever it is. But you can see that if we just went ahead and said everybody ought to break out their money by X, Y, and Z, there's going to be different ways that different places can break it out. And so I think we want to have kind of this tiered sense of what options there are, with plenty of options for individual states to report more than that, right? So that that you can always add on additional categories beyond the reporting standards, but the reporting standards give you a sense of what you can and cannot compare across states. Any other thoughts? This was a great, we love this file that you sent us. It was really rich and had a lot of sense of, you can see across all these different schools, the work that you've been doing to kind of quantify, break down, and sort of take stock of how the money is flowing, which makes sense. But I love that it's all in per pupil terms on these pictures, and you can get a sense of how it adds up and where spending is higher or lower.
I think for us, we have a little bit of fear that the snapshots require so much explanation. So just seeing how you guys, I just randomly selected these 3 schools. I know that Barton gets a 0.2 guidance counselor funded out of a grant.
Yeah.
And I know that supplemental support for Alliance High School is a specific transportation related issue to their charter contract. But what it's helping us do as we look, quite frankly, we operate a large number of schools, some with very few kids in them, and we look long-term at our financial stability picture and try to help reframe the conversation locally, that you get bigger bang for your buck by closing a school of 200 and putting it with a school of 200 to get a school of 400 that has the capacity to grow to 600. Transportation in our world makes a difference. When we have several board members who want to transport kids door to door, I think they underestimate the amount of spending per school that's actually going to transportation and not going to direct instructional services or supports.
Well, and that is such a great example of how powerful these data can be if everybody has them. Because you can imagine, like, let's say that transportation looks high for this first school, Alliance, whatever it is. And maybe Alliance starts to say, we look expensive because you're spending so much on our transportation. Can you give us some of that money and we'll cut some corners on the transportation then. So you, in other words, if what used to be that, you know, the schools never thought they might get some of the savings, right? But now they can see where their money's going. And the money's sort of on their books. And the idea is that then they might speak up and suggest, you know, put pressure on the system to apply those funds in ways that matter more for their students, if they feel that kind of own that, how much money is spent on for my kids and what outcomes did I get. So I think, you know, that's super exciting.
I think we're excited as well. I think it's a very different conversation with a school leader who's complaining about how high their SPED population is, for example, when they are getting all of their SPED costs covered, plus they get a per pupil for those kids on top. It's really those SPED students who are keeping their doors open. That's a game-changing conversation for us.
Yeah. Well, and that's a place, sure, what's really interesting, and we know this from our other group, that, you know, different school districts deal with special ed in very different ways. So their costs might really change with that, which might be this is why I think special ed might be one of the most important categories to potentially break out, because there's a lot of variation in the spending, and because it makes, it affects the school's bottom line in such a big and powerful way. Excellent. Well, I think, this is where we are. We have a couple resources, and we'll get the slides posted. And because these are two data sets that we've been, or two different reports that we've been looking at for today's stuff, we're aiming, for some of our next few meetings to go deeper on starting to pull out possibilities for reporting standards. Like I mentioned, we'll be doing a sub-session on SLFS. And we'd like to bring to you the example of the data where the integrating of the electronic files was done in Maryland for when that's ready. So the ordering of those three things, we're going to try to scramble on our end to make sure that we'll be getting those all to you, but I'm just not sure at what date and at what time. And then we would love any thoughts that you have on these reporting standard stuff. So, we kind of put together these 3-tier concept, but we're not for sure what goes in each tier, and we're going to be doing some digging and pulling some stuff out. But if you have thoughts, maybe you think there needs to be 4 tiers, maybe you think this is too much, maybe you just don't like this method at all, let us know, because this is kind of new and important work, and we want it to be responsive to what you think will be useful in the end. So that's where we are today. We're right at the hour. So sorry for the long call today, but we'll stay on for a few more minutes if you all have any questions or comments. And if you need to run off, we understand that as well. Thank you for coming. A very packed session, and so I appreciate it.
And this is Katie, so sign off if you need to. Just want to add in really quickly, if you do have feedback on this particular slide, if you want to suggest anything different, if you want to even just have a call with me and talk through some possibilities, a lot of you, nine states said they're already in that kind of bucket 1. You have the data, you're thinking about this stuff and how you're going to report it. So we want to hear from you and kind of hear what you're thinking about. So let me know.
Excellent. Thank you all.
Yeah, Mark, I see your comment. I will send you an email and we can talk.
Well, it doesn't look like there are any remaining questions. We'll go ahead and sign off, and we're always available by email. Thank you so much, everyone. Pat, I can see your comment. I'm not sure if Katie's still on, but we'll definitely have her get in touch with you about the EdFi Technical Congress meeting. Thanks.